A poor housemaid was sentenced to 20 lashes. Back then, that was almost a death sentence. All because she wouldn't keep quiet about the abuse and lawlessness her former master was committing. But the moment the whip rose for the first strike, a young Apache warrior stepped forward. And what happened next became the beginning of our story. Welcome to Weathered Stories. Today I'll tell you a story from the far-off Wild West, about a housemaid named Eliza and an Apache warrior named Nanton. They believe we all stand equal before God, so they stood up to the wealthy and powerful in their town. And now only a miracle can save them from a brutal payback at the hands of a crooked sheriff. If you believe in honesty and justice and want to know whether Eliza and Nanton can overcome cruelty and abuse of power, please leave a like, and we'll begin. Morning over Mesquite Crossing came still and windless. The sun was just pushing through a dusty sky, and people already packed the town square. A silent crowd ringed a wooden platform, painted gray and flaking with age and with old blood. Off to the side sat a water barrel and an iron dipper, there to wet the whip, the way official punishment required. Three stood on the platform. In the center, on her knees with her hands tied behind her back, was a young black woman, Eliza May Carter. Her torn dress had slipped from her shoulders. Old scars crossed her back. Beside her waited a tall, silent executioner in a leather apron and his two helpers. One held a coiled whip. The other held a bottle of smelling salts. At the edge of the platform stood Sheriff Tom Doolin. In one hand he had a paper, in the other his hat, taken off for show and nothing more. For perjury and slander against a respected citizen of this county, he read, "The prisoner, Eliza May Carter, is sentenced to punishment by the whip, 20 lashes, to be carried out at once." The crowd froze for a heartbeat. Then a low murmur rolled through it. Soft, but clear. Someone whispered, 20? She won't make it. Another muttered, she's still near, girl. A woman in black crossed herself. An old man pressed his lips tight and looked away. Someone crushed a hat in both hands like he could crush his own voice. Quiet, the sheriff snapped, spinning toward them. The noise died at once. People pulled back like they'd been given a drill order. No one dared say another word. Everybody knew what 20 lashes meant here. Skin split to the bone. Some died right there. Some the next day. But the ending was almost always the same. Everybody knew. Someone crossed himself again. The woman in black covered her mouth with her hand. A man beside her clenched his jaw and didn't move. Eliza didn't move either. Her face looked tired, but proud. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She only stared straight ahead, toward the spot where her own breath seemed to end. With smoke curling over the square, yesterday came back to Eliza all at once. A day when things could still have turned another way. The room at the San Pedro Mission was plain, scuffed walls, a table, 2 benches. In one corner hung a small holy icon. Above it, a map of the county. Dusty light pushed through the windows. The mission teacher, Mrs. Hester Brown, sat with her hands folded, watching Eliza closely. Across from them sat a man in a light vest, neat beard, portfolio on his knees. Alan Reed, an agent of the Freedmen's Bureau. Eliza spoke clearly, without wavering. She had copied everything in her notebook ahead of time. Page by page, she laid it out. In Kincaid's ledger the numbers say one thing, but folks are paid another. They get less in hand. The rest gets taken for debt. No one can ever tell you what that debt is. Even Widow Harper, she worked it all off. Reed jotted notes in a small book. He didn't interrupt. And there's more. Eliza pulled out a folded slip. Here's a copy of a receipt from Greenlee's store. On paper Kincaid paid. In truth, they charged it to debt. People never knew. She lifted a second notebook. And here, brand swaps. He ordered men to burn his initials over other marks. Not the first time. Cattle on that pasture belong to someone else, but the papers say they're his. I wrote down those brands myself when I worked in his office, before they sent me back to field work. Hester Brown nodded, lips tight. She'd known pieces of this, but feared to confirm anything without proof. At last Alan Reed looked up from his notes. If this holds up, Miss Carter, You'll help a lot of people. I'll take this on. Personally. He stood and shook her hand, polite, reserved. But Kincaid moved faster. That evening, Sheriff Doolin just happened to drop by the mission. He stepped outside with Reed for a talk on the porch. Half an hour later, the deputy came up with papers, in order to question Eliza. By that same night, the questioning had turned into an accusation. The papers were already signed, the date backdated to the day before. The record claimed Eliza had tried to alter the debt ledger. No witnesses allowed. They arrested her on the mission steps and didn't let her gather her things. Hester cried out. They shoved her aside. That night, sitting in a damp cell, Eliza understood it all. She knew she'd walk onto the square tomorrow as an example, to warn the rest. But she felt no regret. She had told the truth, and she wasn't going to take it back. That same evening, when they arrested Eliza on the mission steps, a rider on a sorrel Mustang pulled up by the well. His name was Nantan, an Apache warrior, quiet, with a shadow in his eyes that hadn't lifted since he left his people's land. He had come for salve and willow bark powder for an ailing old woman in the hills. But he ended up witnessing something else. He paused by the well and heard a voice through the window. A woman, clear, without spite, but with pain. Her voice was tight as a bowstring. Nannan stopped and listened. He didn't know who she was, but he felt she was telling the truth others were afraid to even whisper. He heard the man who called himself an agent thank her and promised to check it out. He heard the sheriff arrive later, and he saw them lead her out with her hands tied, as if the verdict had already been passed. Too fast, too smooth. People in the yard dropped their eyes. No one stepped up for her, even those who had greeted her the day before. Nantan saw fear in their faces, the same fear he'd seen long ago in his own camp, when a young boy named Tajai was taken for a white man's crime. He was too late then. He sat by the fire a long time after, listening to the elders say nothing, and he swore he wouldn't look away again. Not once. He stayed by the mission that night. He didn't ride off. In the stable, he soaked a coarse cloth in the water barrel and tied it so he could throw it into a fire in one motion. He sharpened his knife, checked the stirrups, checked his horse. At first light, while the town was only waking up, Nantan was already at the edge of the square. The wide shadow of his hat hid his face. His hands stayed under the poncho. He stood by the hitching rail, unnoticed like a stone by the road. His Mustang snorted beside him, ready to leap at the first cue. Folks walked past. Some didn't see him. Some figured he was just another Indian bringing in hides or wood. No one paid him any mind. He looked to the brazier, already burning bright at the edge of the platform, where the executioner would stand. A thin ribbon of smoke rose from it. In a few seconds, everything would change. He slid a hand under the poncho, felt the rough, wet cloth in his fingers, took a step, then another. It was time. The whip rose into the air. Nantan saw it like a slowed-down frame. The executioner's hand, the tight shoulder, the shine of leather in the sun. With one sure throw, he pitched the wet cloth straight into the brazier. A heart is cracked out, like oil splashed on coals. The flame choked, and a thick white-gray smoke surged up, swallowing the platform and half the square. People gasped. Someone coughed. Others, unsure what was happening, began to back away. Nantan ran up the steps just as the executioner reeled, shielding his eyes from the acrid curtain. She was there in front of him, on her knees, hands strapped behind her like an animal in a slaughter pen. Her face was pale with pain and weariness, but her eyes held no fear, only stubborn will. Nannan didn't say a word. He dropped to a knee, drew his knife, and in one clean pull cut the straps at her wrists. She swayed, not grasping at once that she was free. Up, he said, short and firm. Run with me. And she rose. Behind them someone shouted. What's that? Who is it? A gunshot cracked a beat later. A bullet slammed into the railing, spraying splinters. Nantan yanked the girl behind him, shielding her with his body, and drove her toward the steps without looking back. People shrank away in fear. He knew there was no time. Not a second. The hitching rail was close. The Mustang sensed him before his hand found the reins. The horse lurched, then settled. Nantan swung into the saddle, reached down for Eliza, and hauled her up in front of him without giving her a chance to hesitate. Hold tight. Still not fully understanding, Eliza clutched the mane and the saddle horn. Her heart hammered, so hard it felt like it might break free. Was this a rescue? A kidnapping? A dream? The Mustang lunged, knocking over a stool and scattering barrels. People jumped back. Someone yelled. Someone grabbed for the reins. But it was all too fast. Sheriff Tom Doolin lunged to the edge of the platform, voice breaking into a shout. Mount up. Move. Get them. They won't get far. 2 deputies hit the saddle, and 3 of Kincaid's men followed. Dust rose. Hooves thundered. Ahead, through a narrow cut between buildings, the Mustang was already flying. He carried them like in a fight, springy, cutting across backyards and stock pens. They tore through an empty garden plot, burst past a torn-up fence, jumped a shallow creek, and reached the lip of an arroyo, dropping deep. That's where the game trails began, not on any map, worn by foxes and coyotes. Nanan had used trails like these as a boy to shake a chase. Now he led the woman he had just saved. He turned slightly toward Eliza, without slowing, handed her a canteen. She grabbed it on reflex, hands shaking, took a sip. Breathe, he said, short and calm. Eyes front. Her hair whipped in the wind. Her lips were dry. Her face was pale. But she held on. She didn't ask where he was taking her. She didn't ask who he was. She just rode, one arm around him, the other pressing the canteen to her chest. Far back in town, shots cracked. Angry voices carried on the wind. One voice cut through the noise, sharp, menacing. That's Rawls, Nantan said. He'll run us to the ground. Eliza didn't know who Rawls was. But from Nanton's tone she understood. This man wouldn't forgive an escape. The dust thinned. The ground under the hooves turned harder. They climbed higher. To the left, hills opened up. To the right, a burned-out stretch of prairie. Stones clicked under the Mustang's shoes. But he ran sure, like he knew what was at stake. On the ridge crest Nanan looked back for a heartbeat. Dust, thunder, shouting, far behind now. He turned his eyes forward, to the horizon where freedom began. Under the low willows by a tiny spring, they stopped, just for a moment. The Mustang was blowing hard, nostrils flared, his back in lather. Eliza slid out of the saddle, clumsily, knees shaking. Her whole body hurt, especially her wrists where the straps had been. But she stayed quiet, trying not to show weakness. Nantan looked around, crouched beside her, and pulled a strip of clean cloth and a narrow strap from his bag. Let me see your hands, he said softly. She held out her wrists. The skin was raw from chafing, marked red by the leather. Nantan rinsed the scrapes with water from the canteen and wrapped them carefully. His fingers moved sure and gentle. Then he stood, drew a short, double-barreled shotgun from its case, and held it out to her. Take it. Eliza gave him a startled look. What for? They can still catch us. I can't hold them off alone. Better you're ready. She didn't argue. She took the gun carefully, like something that wasn't hers. She had never held a gun before, only seen men with them on the farm. Nanan stepped closer. Watch. Feet shoulder width. Don't clamp your elbows. Easy on your fingers. He stood beside her and showed how to hold it, adjusting her stance with light touches to her shoulders and arms. Then he leaned in. Breathe. Not sharp. And out. Then press the trigger. Slow. Don't yank. Eliza nodded. She sighted on a tree. Pull the trigger, click. Then again. Empty. The gun wasn't loaded. He'd made sure beforehand. Let your body remember, he said, taking the shotgun back. She looked at him steadily, almost grown in that moment. Nanan added, I helped you. From here on, we both learn. Together. Eliza nodded again. Something new stirred in her chest. A mix of fear, gratitude, and a feeling she couldn't yet name. It felt like more than being rescued. It felt like being treated as an equal. She held his gaze a heartbeat longer than she meant to, then turned to the little stream, hiding eyes gone red. The sun leaned toward the horizon, gilding the dry hills and heating the rocks hotter than at noon. A light wind teased the willow leaves as Nantan dropped to one knee and started drawing in the sand. Here's the ravine, he said, tracing a line with his finger. Blind turns. Ledges to hide on. Steep walls. If we move careful, we can dodge a straight chase. He drew another line, wide and straight. And this is the open plain. Wide as a hand. If they spot us out there, we're done. Eliza watched the marks without interrupting. The deep curves in the sand looked tangled and uneasy. What if they go into the ravine too? She asked. Then we still hold the edge. I know every bend in Coyote Split. I hunted there. Hid there. Lived there. They can't run fast in it. He stood, brushing sand from his palm. Your resolve is a weapon too. There's no shame in fear. The shame is quitting. Eliza nodded. Her face was tight, but her eyes were steadier than in the morning. Less fear. More resolve. They went through their gear. Anything not needed to live they left under the willow, covered with a slicker. Nantan checked his rifle and cinched the saddle tight. Eliza, awkward but willing, did the same. Checked the short shotgun, tightened the canteen strap. When the last sunlight touched the split at the base of the slope, they walked to its mouth. Inside it was already thick with shadow, cooler air, and walls that pressed close. Nantan stepped in first. We go quiet here. Stay on me. Eliza followed. The open country lay behind them. Ahead waited a maze of rock and dark that could save their lives, or take them. The scorched walls of Coyote Split closed in tighter and tighter. The air grew heavier and still. Their steps stayed steady, until a burst of gunfire ripped from the left. Bullets smacked into the rock overhead. Stone dust rained down. The Mustang flinched. Nantan moved in a flash, grabbed Eliza's shoulder, and shoved her behind a flat boulder. Down, he barked, crouching behind the next outcrop. Another shot boomed. 3 men appeared in the narrow cut, Kincaid's hands. One wore a hat with a brass plate. Another leveled a rifle. The third lagged but kept them in his sights. Nantan pressed his back to the stone and tipped his head toward her. Left rock. See that ledge? Eliza nodded without lifting her head. Wait. Now. She popped up just as he'd taught. No panic, just a heartbeat. Raised a short gun and took aim. She remembered. Breathe out. Press. Don't jerk. She fired. The heavy blast ran high but spooked the shooter. He ducked, and his shot went wide. Her second shot clipped the edge of a boulder. The ricochet sprayed grit and made one of the men cough and drop low. Good. Nantan breathed. Now a run. Left side. Fast. He slipped forward, drawing their fire. Bullets hissed. One shaved a rock an inch from him. He snapped a shot back, mostly to cover the sound. Go! Eliza sprinted, as best she could, on her knees, over gravel, toward the next cover. Her heart pounded wild, but she didn't stop. Nantan was there first. He caught her by the elbow and pulled her behind the spur. They took a few breaths. For a moment, silence. Then angry voices from behind, cursing, and where'd they go? Nantan glanced up. A tight slope, and beyond it light. The way out. One more dash. No stopping. Ready. Eliza swallowed and nodded. Then move. They broke for it. Through the roar in her head, past stone and shadow, through the gunfire, toward the light. They burst out of the split onto the slope. The sun hit them full in the face. Behind lay only the echoes of the chase. The mountains fell back, and an uneasy open stretch opened ahead. Then Nantan stumbled and dropped to one knee. I'm okay, he breathed, as Eliza rushed to him. On his shoulder, just above the blade, blood showed red, cut by a stone chipped loose by a ricochet. He didn't complain, but his breathing turned heavy. Eliza looked around. No trees, no shade, only rock and grass. Don't move, she said, sharp but gentle at the same time. She tore the hem of her dress and wrapped the wound. She pulled it tight and cinched it with her belt, yanked off her waist. Nantan watched her in silence. Then, for the first time, and not like before, he said, Eliza. He spoke her name softly, as if not just recognizing her, but accepting her. She didn't answer, only gave a short nod, hiding how that name stirred something inside. Her eyes softened, but both knew they couldn't stop. Nantan pushed up on his free arm and pointed. Over there. Southwest. The rock ridge. We'll travel under it. They won't see us there. Their silhouettes slipped into the heat shimmer and the mirage, step by step drawn away from that place. By sunset, worn out from the road, they reached an old station, half forgotten, stripped by wind and sun. A sign reading San Miguel Relay hung from a single nail, rocking at the slightest breeze. The doors to the main room stood open. One creaked, like someone had just left and never come back. Inside, dim light, dust, and silence. On the wall, a cobweb telegraph set. A small pile of coal in the corner, a cold stove. In the storeroom, under a plywood hatch, they found a water barrel. The water was cloudy, but drinkable. Nearby lay a roll of bandage and a few army hardtack biscuits wrapped in oiled paper. Scouts have used this place, Nantan said. Or runaways. Eliza rinsed the bandages, wrung them out, and retied his shoulder without asking. He didn't resist, just watched her, no wariness left in his eyes. Only thanks. And respect. When the sun finally slipped below the prairie, they barred themselves in the old shed next door. They braced the door with a beam. The shed was tight but dry. Straw littered the floor. Broken crates leaned in the corner. "I'll take first watch," he said. "Then I'll take the second," she answered softly. Dusk had settled over the station when a voice sounded behind the shed, tired and hoarse. "Hey, don't shoot. I'm friendly." Nanan was on his feet at once, knife in one hand, rifle in the other. Eliza slipped to the door and peered out. A man came from behind a bush, shabby, wearing a vest, a spool of copper wire slung over one shoulder, a tool bag on the other. Sweat and road dust covered his face. "Jed Pike, telegrapher," he said, hands lifted. "Work the southern section. Ever hear of the Alvido station? I can name names. Carlos Blake, Tom Dorn. Fixed their lines last month." He came closer, dropped his bag, and squatted. From his pocket, he pulled a small tin of salve. "Here. For burns, cuts, anything that hurts. I made it myself. My mom's father was a healer." He talked fast and nonstop, like he was afraid they wouldn't let him finish. He fished out a tobacco pouch, offered it, then rolled himself a smoke without waiting. "Down in the valley, they say there's a cordon. Looking for somebody. Truth is, I didn't go higher. Figured I'd sleep here tonight. You won't run me off." He spread his hands, looking from one to the other. "Just one night. I swear it. By morning I'll be gone before you can blink." Eliza shot Nanan a quick look. She knew men like this. Too quick, too smiley. Talk too much. "I don't like him," she whispered. Nanan didn't answer at first. Then, briefly, "He sleeps by the door. We keep our guns." Sensing the tension, Jed dropped his voice. He settled by the wall, close to the warm stone. "I'm not much of a talker, truly. Just glad to see folks. Out on these stations it's mice and dust." He smiled again, but his eyes stayed watchful. Too watchful. For now he was useful. The salve, the word about the cordon. But something about him put her on edge. Eliza felt it right away. And Nanan set the rifle within reach and never took his eyes off the man. The pre-dawn quiet held until the first rustle of the door. Eliza flinched and pushed up on an elbow. Beyond the boards came a sliding step that snagged on a nail, a muffled curse, then the crunch of dry grass. Nanan was already on his feet. He lifted a hand, silence. He put an eye to a crack. In the half-light a shape slid past. Narrow back, a vest, a spool of wire on a strap. "Jed," Eliza whispered. He was fussing at the corner of the shed where they'd set the kerosene lamp for the night. A heartbeat, and glass rang. The lamp tipped. Kerosene splashed in a dry straw. A thin tongue of flame drew itself like a line across the floor. Jed jerked, as if he'd scared himself, but didn't stomp it out. He yanked 2 canteens off a hook, snatched an ammo belt from the doorway, and ran downhill into the dark. "There he goes." Eliza stepped for the door. "Too late," Nantan said, short and flat. "Fire." A draft pushed up from the arroyo, and the low strip of flame spread wider, snapping like dried corn thrown on hot coals. Sparks leaped to the roof. The sill boards began to smoke. The air turned bitter and hot. "The horse," Nantan said, sliding the bar back. They burst outside. The Mustang at the hitching post pawed hard, nostrils foaming, whites of his eyes showing. Nantan ripped the bridle free with one hand and shoved the horse from the wall with the other. Flame was already licking the door frame. Up, he snapped to Eliza. No, together. She coughed, shaking her head. Up. He lifted her by the waist and set her in the saddle. She barely had time to nod. Something banged loud inside the shed. The sharp sound hit a nerve, and the Mustang sprang like a coiled spring. Eliza grabbed for the mane and pressed to the saddle horn. The horse wheeled hard and bolted, away from heat, smoke, and crackle. Hooves hammered stone, sparks skittered from his shoes. She tried to catch the reins, but the animal only ran faster, pulling her into the dark gap between the boulders. Nantan, she cried. He took a step, as if a word could stop the horse, then knew. It was too late. Fire already licked the wall, the wind drawing it toward the yard. One step the wrong way would be a trap. Nantan covered his face with a sleeve and backed from the heat. His eyes burned. Boards popped and crackled. Sparks fell with a hiss. Eliza's shape flashed once more, farther off, by the rock edge, and vanished around the bend. Nantan was left alone before the roaring fire. Empty hooks on the wall where the canteens had hung, and a belt light where cartridges should have been. He tightened his grip on the knife, drew a breath, and stepped out into open ground, to find a trail that would lead him to the ridge, the way the frightened horse had carried Eliza. The Mustang ran as long as fear and strength would carry him. Then he slowed, snorted, blew hard, and stopped by a rock lip. Eliza sat tight, as in a vice. Her fingers wouldn't obey. Her heart hurt with every beat. She slid to the ground, hugged the horse's hot neck, pressed her brow to his mane. She stood like that until her breathing evened out. A dry plain stretched ahead. In the distance, thin columns of smoke rose from home stoves. Eliza led the Mustang that way at a walk. Dust stuck to her face and throat. Every step thudded in her back. The settlement appeared all at once. A few adobe huts, sheds, the low bell tower of the San Pedro mission. Women stood by the well. They stiffened at the sight of a stranger. But a small white woman in a plain dress was already coming toward her. Hester Brown. She took Eliza by the elbow, sat her on a bench in the shade, and held out a cup. Small sips, she said gently. You're safe here. The water burned sweet down her throat. Eliza shut her eyes and couldn't hold back. Tears came on their own. Hester laid a shawl over her shoulders. A sturdy, dark-skinned man in a leather apron stepped up. Miguel Orozco, he said. Let me see that lead rope. Your tack's all chewed up. He crouched by the Mustang, quickly loosened a buckle, tightened the cinch, and slid a scrap of leather into place. The horse settled and stopped shaking. While Miguel worked, folks drifted closer. First two, then three more. A man with 2 fingers gone. A young mother with a baby on her hip. An old-timer in a worn hat. They stood off to the side and listened. Eliza spoke plainly. How they grabbed her, why they sentenced her, how an Apache cut her loose, how the fire split them up at the station. She asked for nothing. She only told the truth. Their faces changed. Caution gave way to quiet anger and pity. Someone nodded. Someone pressed their lips tight. The young mother whispered, How much more of this? The old man leaned hard on his cane. We know what it's like when no one listens. Hester set her hand on Eliza's. You're heard here. Here, everyone has a name. Metal chimed soft in the bell tower. Lamps were being lit at the mission. The smell of bread drifted from the oven. Miguel straightened and wiped his brow with the back of his hand. The horse is fine. You will be too. You'll stay the night. In the morning we'll figure the rest. Eliza nodded. The tremor still lived inside her, but these people made the world quieter. She looked at the bell, at the even smoke over the roofs, and spoke barely above a whisper, mostly to herself. We're all equal before God. Hester answered just as simply, and we'll do our best to make sure everyone understands that. Morning began with a mission bell and the smell of cornmeal mush. Eliza woke on a bench by the stove. Her body ached, but her head was clear. Hester set a bowl in front of her and gave a small nod. Eat. Out in the yard, Miguel's hammer rang as he checked the horse's shoes. A wagon loaded with flour sacks rolled up to the mission gate. The driver, a tall man with a sunburned face, stopped at the well, climbed down, and drank. Miguel looked up. "Hank, what's the news in town?" He sighed and took off his hat. "Nothing good. At First Light, Sheriff Doolin was marching an Indian prisoner to the jail. Tied tight. They say they caught him at the East Ford. Somebody tipped them off." The word Indian hit like a whip. Eliza stood too fast. The bowl rattled. What did he look like?" Her voice broke. "Tall. Wearing a poncho. Shoulder bandaged. Looks like your man," Hank said, his face a mix of pity and anger. "And one more thing. In the saloon they bragged the telegrapher. What's his name? Jed Pike. Told the sheriff where to find him. I saw Doolin shake his hand and slip him coins. Wire spool over his shoulder. I've seen him on the line before." The room went quiet. Somewhere outside a bird cried. Eliza clenched her fist until her knuckles went white. Betrayal burned worse than yesterday's fear. "So he brought them to him," she said flat. "First he stole our canteens, then set the place on fire. And now, he turned him in." She sat a long time without a word, fingers tight, as if she could hold the pain in place. Her chest burned, not from anger, but from emptiness. Yesterday he covered her with his own body, and today they led him in chains down the same street where she'd almost been killed by law. One thought hammered at her. He's there because of me. Then another came. Steady, no. He made his choice. Now it's my turn to make mine. Toward evening, she stepped into the little chapel. The bench felt cool. It smelled of wax and wood. Eliza knelt and closed her eyes. The words came on their own, simple. "Lord, if we're all equal before you, give me the courage to do what's right. Give me hands that don't shake and a mind that won't lie. And bring him back alive." She didn't ask for revenge, only rescue. Sleep came in jolts that night. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw the square, the noose, his quiet face. She remembered how he said her name, how he held her by the elbow when the world tilted. Her hand found a crusted spot on her dress. His blood. Fear was close, but another feeling rose with it, like a tight string drawn inside her. She couldn't let it go now. The next morning, as soon as the sun cleared the hills, Eliza was already up. She stood on the mission porch, searching the horizon as if Nanton's shape might appear any minute. "I'm going after him," she told Hester, calmly, as if saying she was going for water. "Eliza, he saved me. Now it's my turn." Hester didn't argue. She pressed her lips together and nodded. Half an hour later she had what they needed. A rough laundress's dress, a white apron, a dark bonnet, and a wide black veil that covered half her face. Eliza rubbed ash on her skin to look paler, tucked her hair under the bonnet, and practiced walking with a slight hunch, eyes down. Now she was someone else, gray, unnoticeable, the kind you'd pass without a second look. Miguel Orozco, who'd had his own share of loss and grievance at the hands of the powerful, wiped his palms and said, "I'm going. We've kept quiet long enough." Hank Doyle joined him, a tall fellow with a sharp gaze and soot-stained hands. He'd only recently moved to the settlement, but he hated Kincaid with his whole heart. Hank gave a short nod, and that yes was stronger than any words. In the shed, on the laundry table, they started sketching a plan, a street map, where the sheriff was, where the wagon would be, where the livery stood, where Nan Ann might be held. "We'll stir up noise by the livery," Hank said. "I'll toss a lamp into the water trough. It'll flare, cause a commotion. I'll ring the bell," Mrs. Brown added. "Folks will think it's an alarm. The sheriff will look that way. I'll pull up a flour wagon." Miguel pointed at the crossroads. "Right when you're coming out. It has to be quiet," Eliza said. "No gunfire. No panic. Just precision." The plan was crazy, but there was no other. That same day, toward evening, a heavy quiet settled over the town. People walked faster, kept their eyes down, like they could feel a storm coming. No one knew that in alleys, at the livery, and up by the old bell tower, a careful, quiet plot was already taking shape. Miguel headed for the livery first. There by the troughs and the hay, 2 former Union soldiers were working, Tommy Winslow and Jack Old Man Harris. They knew what injustice looked like, and they were done putting up with Kincaid. Round midnight, Miguel said low, "You open the west paddock gate. Let the horses stretch their legs." "Just an accident," Jack nodded. "We didn't notice." Happens. Happens, Tommy snorted. "Especially when the town's asleep." Meanwhile, Hank Doyle eased a flour wagon in close to the warehouses. On the outside, just a regular rig labeled Greenlee and Sons. Inside, another story, 2 blankets, water and skins, some jerky, and an old dress so Eliza could change again. Under the tarp ran a long wooden shelf where 2 people could lie low. "All set," he whispered, patting the sideboard. "We can roll the second you're in." Mrs. Brown made for the old bell tower, just as the apprentice boy came to swap out the bell rope. She stepped in to help, friendly as always. In passing, she asked, "When do you ring now?" "Still at 1, 3, and 5. Mostly. Sometimes 5 minutes off. Depends on the town watch." She tucked it away, smiled, bless the boy, and to herself, "I'll pull it 2 minutes early." Enough to throw the rhythm. All the while Eliza, veiled, walked the route from the mission's back lot to where the wagon would wait. She memorized the turns, the steps between houses, which gate opened where. Twice she looped 2 backup paths, in case the main one got blocked. "Watch your step," Miguel said. "That flat tile in front of the bakery is always slick, and the dogs bark at the back steps. Go around them." "I'll manage," she said, steady. Everything was mapped out. Everyone had a role. No one backed away. Dawn laid a flat gray light over the town. The air didn't move, and it felt like even the birds were holding their breath. Mesquite Crossing Square filled up again. People gathered in silence, not meeting each other's eyes. In front of the courthouse, the wooden platform stood ready, a strap hanging from the post. The executioner checked the knot, tugged at the rigging like a butcher before a cut. Sheriff Doolin stood beside him, arms crossed, rolling his neck with a heavy, tired look, like a man worn out by resistance. The crowd whispered, at first barely careful. A blink here, a cough there. Just like last time. Everyone knew what was coming. Then the bell rang. A sharp, bright strike, early. By the schedule, it shouldn't sound for 5 more minutes. Now it rang like an alarm. "Why now?" Someone up front said aloud. "What's going on?" Heads turned. The sheriff squinted, drawing breath to bark an order, when a preacher started reading behind him. An older man with a Bible stood to the side of the platform and raised his voice. "For there is no difference between Jew and Greek. The same Lord is Lord of all." A heartbeat, and someone in the crowd said out loud, "Was there even a trial?" A woman in her 40s, hair in a tight bun, covered her mouth and shook her head. They didn't hear a thing, just took her. "Enough," another woman whispered, barely audible. "Enough of living like this." In the middle of the crowd, 2 men traded a look. The same 2, Tommy and Jack, the ex-soldiers. One slowly let his hand drop to the belt where his holster hung. It was a small sound, a tiny shift, but the sheriff caught it. He spun fast, his eyes scanning faces. And for the first time in a long while, something flickered there. Not anger, but confusion. Control over the crowd. A single second, and it began to slip. At the foot of the platform stood a small woman in a long dark dress and a wide white apron. A heavy black veil hid her face. She held a basket that looked full of clean laundry. Eyes down, she stood meekly, as if waiting to be noticed, to deliver a message, or to step up with rags. It was Eliza. Under those rags on her shoulder lay a short handsaw. Her insides burned, but her face stayed still. Off on the far side of the square, 2 stable hands traded a look and pulled the gate pins. With a crack, the paddock burst open and a dozen horses lunged forward, snapping tethers, smashing rails, kicking in panic. People shouted and jumped back. The square broke into motion and noise, the distraction they'd been waiting for. Eliza dropped the basket and sprang up the steps. One rush, and she was on the platform. The executioner turned, too late. She raised her arm and sawed hard twice across the taut strap. Nantan, his shoulder bandaged, pitched forward, barely keeping his feet. His breath came rough, but his eyes were already searching for her. Eliza yanked up the short shotgun and fired into the air. The shot cut through the roar. The crowd ducked by instinct. A few dropped flat. Someone cried. They're armed. Eliza grabbed Nanton's hand, and they tore off the platform. Everything ran to plan. She didn't look back. They ran low, slipping between walls, taking the very alleys she'd memorized the day before. Shouts rose behind them, but the route was set to the last turn. Through a garden. Across a porch with empty crates. Past someone's line of drying clothes. And there it was, the gray roof of the warehouse. And the wagon. The wagon marked Greenlee and Sons rolled slow along the side street, like it was just hauling another load of flour toward the South Bridge. Inside, under the sacks, Hank eased one rear door open. Quick, down, he whispered. Eliza dove in first and pulled Nan in after her. They slid under the sacks and vanished, just like they planned. Their heartbeats matched the rhythm of the wheels. All right, Hank said, swinging the door shut. Hang on. He didn't hurry. He kept the steady pace every local teamster used. He nodded to folks as he passed, never turning his head toward the noise behind. Back in town, the hum was building. Someone on the square had figured it out. Kincaid's men shouted, scattered down the streets, hunting for a trail. One of them pointed toward the wagon. Anybody see someone go by? That flour rig. A teenager shrugged. Just headed for the bridge. Then another voice yelled. They could have gone east. Shouts tangled. Direction blurred. The wagon reached the checkpoint. The guard gave it a lazy once-over and waved them through. Hank tipped his hat and rolled on. On the rear bench lay a rolled shirt, a water skin, and an old cloak. Everything they needed to change and slip away. Under the sacks, Eliza pressed her hand to Nanton's shoulder. He didn't complain, only stared into the dark with a tight focus. Did we get away? She whispered. Almost, he said. The bridge fell behind them, and so did the town. On the far bank, under a stand of willows, their people were waiting. Miguel waved them in. Two others stood beside him, a young Apache with wolfish eyes and a black farmer in a work shirt. Each held a horse. No wagon now. 2 Mustangs and a stocky little mare with bulging saddlebags. Quick, Miguel said. We ride from here. We'll muddle the trail. He handed Eliza a set of reins, then helped Nanton down. Nanton was breathing hard, but holding steady. We'll stash the wagon in my barn, the farmer added. We'll beat down the dust with brush. No one will read the track. Eliza pulled off her veil. Her hair was pinned in a rough knot, her face streaked with sweat and ash, but her eyes were bright. Mount up, she told Nanton, and he did without a word. She lifted his shirt, checked the bandage, and tightened the knot. Nanton stayed quiet, then suddenly took her hand. Simple, gentle. You saved my life, he said. Eliza gave a small, true smile, the first in a long time. We saved each other. They swung into the saddle. The hills ahead were gray-green and dry, but what lay beyond mattered more. Time. Quiet. A chance to think about the next move. Because this wasn't the end. Now they had to gather everything they had. Evidence, receipts, records, and get to the people who could truly stop Kincaid and the sheriff. But first, catch their breath. Find cover. Wait out. In a stony draw thick with thorns and deadfall, a tiny stream whispered. Beyond it, in a niche between 2 boulders, a ledge jutted out. Almost a cave. They dismounted and pulled the saddles. Nanton eased down with his back to the rock. Without a word, Eliza took a bandage, some spirits, and a clean rag from her bag. She sat beside him and gently peeled off the old wrap. His shoulder was swollen and red. The bleeding had stopped, but the skin ran hot. She wet the rag with spirits. It's going to sting, she warned. Used to it. Nanton rasped with a faint smile. She worked with care. She cleaned the wound on fresh bandage, tied it off. He watched her the whole time. Calm. Attentive. On that platform, she whispered. I truly thought I'd die. Nanton nodded. I wouldn't have let that happen. I was scared. I went anyway. And now, I'm scared of getting caught again. He was quiet for a moment, then said softly, I'm tired too. And angry. But if you're beside me, I won't back down. Ever. They shared hardtack. 1 piece for the 2 of them. They built a small fire in the crack of the rocks and ringed it with stones against the wind. Smoke drifted straight up, bothering neither animal nor bird. They didn't talk, but the silence was different. Eliza sat closer. Their breathing settled into the same rhythm. Their hands lay near each other. Night pressed dark all around, but between them, it grew quiet and warm with light. Morning brought cool air and dusty light. Eliza sat on a flat rock by the creek, chewing a tough flatbread. The sun hadn't cleared the ridge yet, but birds were already ringing in the brush. Nanan came over and sat beside her. In his hand was a small leather pouch with a few dried fruits left. He was quiet a moment, then spoke calmly, eyes on the distance. If we head south, over the pass, there's a safe place. An old camp. They won't find us. He said it plain, without pressure. Just an option. A road he himself might have taken. Eliza looked at him. For a long time. Then she shook her head a little. Who tells the truth then? If we run, he'll explain it away. He'll say I fled because I was guilty. That you kidnapped me. Folks will get scared all over again. She straightened up. I don't want to live hiding. Nanan didn't answer, but his look changed. Respect. Acceptance. Warmth. They started a plan. Simple, nothing fancy. Eliza opened her notebook to a clean page. They decided to gather proof, find anyone who had seen anything, and get to Agent Allen Reed. He'd promised to look into it. Now he needed to follow through. We stand on the truth, Eliza said. It won't be easy, but it's right. They agreed. If one of them got in trouble, the other would break off up the north slope. They didn't feel like heroes. They just felt this was their path. Noon found them back at the place that had been their shelter not long ago. San Miguel Relay looked even more forsaken than before. Fire had eaten the shed. Blackened boards lay scattered. The stone part still stood, but the smell of smoke hung on. Nanton stepped past the burned threshold and stopped by a patch of char grass. He bent down and picked up a shard of glass chimney, the remains of the kerosene lamp. Didn't fall by accident, he said. It's greased underneath. Look, he turned the piece over. Along the rim was a thick, dark smear, like oil. Eliza pressed her lips tight. He knew what he was doing. Farther behind the shed, Nantan froze again. He crouched and touched the dust with a fingertip. A boot with a torn heel plate. Same as Jed's. He went toward the main road. Alone. The track curved in a half arc to the southwest and vanished in the rocks. He drew us off, then set the fire. Eliza stared at the blackboards. So he was working for Kincaid. Or the sheriff. Nanan gave a quiet nod. By the wall they found a spool of telegraph wire. The one Jed had hauled around as proof of his job. Now as evidence. Eliza wrapped it in old cloth and hid it deep in a crack behind a big boulder. Let it sit, she said. We'll need it when someone asks for the truth. They both looked out at the empty station. Here, in the ashes, their plans settled into place. Night lay quiet, with only crickets working the grass. On Mesquite Crossing's edge ran a line of sheds, and at the old smithy, coals glowed faintly in the iron forge. Nanan and Eliza came in from the south, skirting the main street. They stopped in the fence's shadow and watched. By the smithy door someone lifted a lantern, the light capped by a hat brim. Hank Doyle. He looked around and raised a hand, signal. They stepped out of the dark. You're on time, he whispered. Town's mostly asleep. The patrol's sticking to the square, and they're lazy tonight. He pulled them into a narrow gap between sheds, spread a sheet of paper, and dug out a piece of coal. He started sketching on his knee. Warehouse is here. The office is closer to the bridge. No one shows before 8. The bookkeeper comes late. You got a window. He glanced up and lowered his voice. I've got news. Those two, ex-Union soldiers, Tom and Ellis, they saw it all. Sheriff rolled up the papers and handed them to Kincaid. They're willing to sign statements. Hank nodded to himself. Good. Here's your dead drop. He tapped the rough map. Backlot, where that old wagon with the busted wheel sits. The board under the bed lifts. We'll hide the papers there. He stood. Don't linger. If they spot you, I can't cover. Thank you, Hank, Nantan said. Don't thank me. Thank the folks. Time to be done with this rot. He slipped into the dark, leaving the lantern tucked under a leather apron by the wall. Dawn found them in the back pasture, the far stretch where cattle almost never grazed by day. The grass was thin, the air cool. Somewhere below, a brook murmured. Nantan led the horse by the reins. Eliza walked beside him. Over there by the point, he said. Saw it when we passed before. Among the cows and yearlings they spotted a calf, red, with a patch on its side. They moved in. A brand marked its hip, and not just one. Look, Nantan said softly. The lower mark's faint. Over it, fresh char. Eliza knelt and peered. The first mark was nearly gone, a letter S inside a circle. Burned over it were the initials DK. That's the Suarez family brand, she said. I remember their pasture. Nanan took a bit of charcoal and a thin sheet of parchment, pressed it to the calf's side, and rubbed carefully. The tracing came out sharp, 2 layers, one over the other. He folded the sheet and handed it to Eliza. She opened her notebook and wrote it all down. Location, date, wind direction, markings and code. Is that enough? Better if someone backs it, Nantan said. A cough sounded behind them. An old man in a sombrero, leaning on a knotted staff, stepped from the shade of a tree. Don Esteban, an old vaquero. I saw it, he rasped. They branded that calf when I was there. It's not Kincaid's. Eliza looked at him with hope. Will you come with us? The old man straightened. I'll come, and I'll say what I saw. They nodded. It was their first solid proof, and the first voice raised on their side. At sunset, in the narrow yard behind the store, Hank Doyle set a rolled plan on a barrel. The office empties out after 9, he said. The bookkeeper, a woman, leaves right at 9. At 9:15 the sheriff usually drops by to check papers or jaw with the guard. He pointed to the alley where the livery backed tight against the fence. Miguel will tie up the sheriff at the saddle rack. Say his stirrups off. Tom and Ellis will back you from inside if it goes sideways. Nantan nodded and went to scout the perimeter. He came back half an hour later. Windows are shut solid, but there's a slit above the shutters, narrow. I can boost you if we're quick. Meanwhile, Eliza laid out what she needed. Clean sheets, a soft graphite stick, an old cloth for rubbings. Her fingers trembled with nerves, but she kept steady. We'll have little time, she said. Only the pages we need. No panic. Hank handed her a black cloth. For your face. Better not show light. A match only if it's pitch black. They synced their watches again. Exit signal. 2 short whistles. That meant clear to move. Nanan looked at Eliza and said quietly, You don't have to. I do, she answered. For the names in those ledgers. The town slept. Only the lanterns of the post office and at the bridge still burned. No one stood near Kincaid's office. Nantan boosted Eliza to the narrow window, bracing her on his shoulder. She slipped inside almost without a sound, like a cat. The room smelled of dust, paper, and lamp oil. Eliza pulled the cloth from her face and took in the dark. A heavy desk with drawers. In the cabinet, familiar ledgers. She drew out the one she needed. Debt ledger, May-August. She opened it, and a chill ran up her spine. Every page was someone's life, a name, an amount, a signature. Debt for lodging, for food, for tools. Everywhere, murky deductions. Folks didn't know what they were paying for, or why they paid twice. She laid a sheet over the page and ran the graphite across the lines. Fast but exact press strokes at, then the next page, and the next. In her notebook, she copied receipt numbers, the ones that tied debts to sham purchases. Her fingers blackened with graphite. Her breathing grew short. On the desk corner lay a blank form with Kincaid's seal. Empty, but already signed and dated. That's how they made debts, backdated and ready. She folded the rubbings, slipped them into an envelope, and fed it through the gap to where Nantan waited outside. Then everything back in place. Ledger to the cabinet, loose form under the press. The room had to look untouched. Outside, 2 short whistles. She returned to the window and pulled herself up. Nannan caught her and set her down easy. They walked off without haste. No sound, no extra glance. Even the yard dog didn't lift its head. By late morning, Eliza came to the store from the back alley. Heat pooled there. Flies buzzed over a pan of water, An old man dozed on a bench under his hat. She knocked once, then twice more, just as arranged. The shopkeeper's wife, Mrs. Greenlee, opened the door, clutching a basket of flour. At the sight of Eliza, her eyes flicked to the alley, then back. "Come in. Quick." Inside, the place smelled of cinnamon, cloth, and new leather. Eliza slipped off her veil and looked around. No one else. She took out a neatly folded slip. Receipt number. Issued June 14th. "Tell me, did these goods go to the people?" The woman bit her lip, then took the slip. She rummaged under the counter and pulled out an old book of tear-off stubs. She ran a finger down the date and found the line. "Here." "Yes," the amount cleared. But her voice dropped. "They marked it a debt." The store listed the goods as delivered, money on the way. 6 sacks went out, but the stub shows 7. Eliza said nothing. The woman sighed. "I saw Mrs. Harper argue that day. They told her, 'You can't read. You wouldn't understand.' But she understood." Eliza met her eyes. "Will you give me a copy? And if a U.S. Marshal comes?" "If he does, I'll speak. I'm not afraid for myself. But it has to be done right." She pressed the paper into Eliza's palm, gave a short nod, and stepped back behind the counter. The old Catfish saloon hummed in the evening sun. Smoke hung under the ceiling. Cards whispered. Glasses chimed. Hank drew Nanton aside at the door. "He's there, third table. Losing his last dollar. Ain't been out since morning." Nanton nodded without reaching for a gun. He simply walked in, past the players, and laid on the green baize a dirty shard of glass and a copper ring. The lamp. The very one. Charred. Cracked. Jed Pike froze. The card in his hand trembled. That's. "We know," Nanton said evenly. "Who hired you?" "I didn't want to. They said if I did it, they'd wipe my debt. I didn't think you'd make it out." 2 men at the bar, ex-soldiers, traded a look. One leaned over. "We saw him. Night before the fire he was jawing, with Kincaid out by the barn. And with the sheriff. Took a canteen off him." Eliza stepped closer. Her voice was quiet, but hard. "You're going to sign it. Everything you just said, under oath. Or you go to the U.S. Marshal as an arsonist. Your choice." Jed's fingers shook. He nodded, took the pen, and sweat dripping scrawled. "I, Jed Pike, do attest." The night was warm. Dust hung in the air, and the cicadas sang so loud it felt like they were trying to drown out fear. By the telegraph shack on the edge of town stood Hank, lantern shaded by his hat. Beside him was a lean old-timer with a crutch and a Union star on his lapel. "Serve under Grant," Hank whispered. "Patriot. He'll help." The old man nodded when he saw the papers. "Send it in code. I'll relay it myself. It won't go missing." Eliza dictated fast. Copies of debt ledgers obtained, double branding of cattle, 3 witnesses willing. Receipts confirmed. Awaiting instructions. EC. The old man tapped the key, grinning. "Sent. We'll have it in Merrill Creek by dawn through the mission. Reed will get it there." Nanton handed over a packet of copies and rubbings. "Everything, even a shard from the lamp. If it goes missing..." "It won't," the old man cut in. "This isn't just a story anymore. It's a case. Wait. 2 days, and you'll have an answer." They shook his hand and slipped back into the dark. The noon sun was melting the rocks, and even the wind blew hot, like out of an oven. A dry arroyo cut between crumbling clay banks. Nanton and Eliza were crossing the bed when a shout came from behind. "Hold it!" Luke Rawls and 2 others, one with a Winchester, the other with a Colt, stepped onto the rim. "Don't, Luke," Eliza called, stepping in front of Nanton. "Things aren't the same now. You made the sheriff look bad. You think that comes easy." Bullets snapped low. One clipped a dead twig at their feet. Nanton shoved Eliza behind a rock and dove the other way. His return shot sent crows wheeling and cawing overhead. The fight lasted less than a minute. One of Rawls's men went down yelling. The second fell back. Luke, backing away, slipped, skidded down the clay into a puddle of thin mud at the bottom. His legs went out. His hands churned in the muck. "Damn! Help me!" Nanton could have walked. He stopped instead. He tore a rope from the saddle and threw it down. "Grab on." Rawls froze, then grabbed, still coughing and choking. The mud sucked at him. His footing vanished. Nanton hauled him up, face tight, wounded, shoulder burning, but he never let go. When Rawls reached the top, both men dropped to the sand. For a few seconds there was only breathing. Rawls looked up, without rage for the first time. Confused. Something new in his eyes. Why you? Nanton didn't answer that. He stood, offered a hand, and said, not because of you. Because of who you could be. Luke lowered his head. He didn't give up. But he didn't run. And he didn't shoot. I'll think on it, he muttered. About all of this. Maybe things really aren't the same. On Sunday morning the chapel at the San Pedro Mission was full. People sat on benches. Some stood along the walls. Light poured through the windows, and a draft stirred the thin curtains. The preacher, an old man with gray in his beard, stood at the pulpit. From Galatians, he began, there is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. He lifted his eyes and looked over the room. We are not judges. We are witnesses. And if we stay silent when we see wrong, we become part of the wrong. Silence settled. Then came footsteps. Mrs. Hester Brown walked to the altar. She spread out papers, copies of debts, signatures, pages from Kincaid's ledger. This, she said simply, isn't law. It's a whip dressed up in a fine cover. Someone sobbed. Then Miguel stepped forward and signed. After him, Hank Doyle. Then Widow Harper. One by one, women and men, old and young. Those who were afraid yesterday signed today. I'm for hearing people out, they said. I'm for protection. I won't be silent anymore. The words circled the room, growing louder. A murmur became a voice. And then they spoke names. Out loud. Kincaid. Doolin. Jed Pike. Now they were named. Not in whispers. Not behind backs. Out loud, under the mission roof. 2 days later, a dusty wagon rolled up by the bridge. 2 men climbed down. One in a bureau vest with a paper portfolio. The other a solidly built man in a gray coat with a brass badge. A deputy U.S. Marshal. Agent Reed stepped forward first. His face was focused, not hostile. He knew he had come to a place where people were waiting for justice. They gathered the petition signers on the square. Eliza stood beside Hester and Nantan. The townsfolk murmured, but now with hope, not fear. The marshal held up papers right there in front of the mayor's office. He opened the order. Based on complaints, sworn statements, and presented evidence, Sheriff Tom Doolin is hereby suspended from duty pending a public hearing. The crowd's murmur rose like a wave. Reed added, the hearing will be public. Tomorrow, here on the square, everyone may speak. Everyone will be heard. The sheriff stood with fists clenched, but he had to step back, under dozens of watching eyes, not with a whip, but in shame. Kincaid didn't sleep all night. By morning his face had gone white with rage, and dark hollows lay under his eyes like someone had snuffed a fire beneath his skin. When he saw the marshal and Agent Reed ride in and announce a hearing, something in him cracked. Sit and wait for a verdict? That wasn't him. He rounded up his men, drovers, camp hands, the fellows who'd done his bidding for a ration and a heavy pour of whiskey. They spilled onto the square, loud, shouting, fists in the air. It's a setup, Kincaid yelled, climbing onto a crate by the store. A savage and a lying woman want to wreck what we built. Where's your order? Where's white power? He rasped, spittle flying. A few cheers popped, but more faces looked unsure. People glanced at one another. To hell with the marshal, one drover barked. We'll settle it ourselves. The marshal stepped forward. His voice was calm and hard. You raise a hand, you go to jail. Not for order, for vigilante justice. In front of everybody. Kincaid stalled. Then old Johnny Graves, a carpenter, a veteran, stepped from the crowd, lifted his cane, and said, first the hearing, then a trial. Not you and a gallows. 2 more followed. Miguel, a former soldier named Ellis. A woman who'd lost her husband to debt. Enough, she said. You are not the law. The drovers began backing off. Their eyes slid to the marshal's sidearm, to Reed with the folder. And all at once it was plain, Kincaid didn't hold that power anymore. The fear was gone. He stared at the crowd with hatred. But he stood alone, and no one reached out a hand. The hearing was held right there on the square. People sat close and quiet, some hand in hand, others crushing their caps. Up front, the marshal, Agent Reed, and 2 county officials. Eliza went first. "I'm no lawyer," she said, "but I can read numbers." She laid out copies from the debt book, name, date, amount, deductions for debt. Beside them, the store stubs, where the figures didn't match. "These are receipts. Here's Miguel's name. Here's Widow Harper's." Money was taken, but it never reached the people. Mrs. Brown stood beside her. "I saw sacks carried into the office per the payroll. We asked. They told us, correspondence with the county. And here's where that correspondence ended." Reed entered each document into the record. The marshal nodded, never cutting in. The crowd stirred. "That's my account. I thought I owed." Someone whispered. "So that's where the payments went," said another. "They made me sign," a third added. Then an old farmer stood, took off his hat, and said, "That's our money. For our work." Silence swelled to a low roar. No one whispered now. Everyone spoke out loud. Nandon stepped forward next. "Come." His shoulder was still bandaged, but his stride was steady. He unrolled a canvas with brand rubbings. 2 marks, one burned over the other. "This is a trail," he said. "A lie burned into a hide. Here's the pasture. Here are the coordinates." An old vaquero named Rafael came beside him. He held a small, char branding block, a piece of the iron. "I saw Kincaid order his mark laid over a neighbor's brand," he rasped. "I kept quiet then. I won't now." The crowd fell silent. Then came footsteps, uncertain ones. Luke Rawls stepped out of the shadows. There was something new in his eyes. He faced the marshal, then Eliza. "He saved my life," Luke said. "I owe the truth." He told how they were ordered to cover the brand swaps, told to set somebody up, how he'd looked away, but he couldn't anymore. "We didn't think she'd keep it all so clear," he said. "We figured it would all fade." It didn't. Last came Jed Pike, with Miguel keeping a hand on him, so he wouldn't bolt. "I set the fire," Jed said. "On orders. They promised to wipe my debt." He laid a hand on the Bible. His voice shook. Sweat beaded on his brow. I'm guilty." The crowd held its breath. Then the first shout. "Shame. They wanted to hang her for the truth. Where's the law?" The roar swelled like a storm rolling in. But up on the platform stood the marshal, his voice firm. "The law is here, and the truth is here, and you are its witnesses." A tight hush settled over the square, strung like a wire. People waited. Some stood with their hands locked. Some stood open-mouthed. Beside Agent Reed, the marshal turned to Sheriff Doolin. His voice carried clean and even, no bluster, so every person could hear. "Sheriff Tom Doolin, pending a full inquiry, you are suspended from duty. Surrender your badge." Doolin froze. He looked around, as if searching for a friendly face. There were only faces. No deputies stepping up. Not a hand raised for him. He took off the badge and held it out, breathing heavy. "All by the book." "Huh," he muttered, the swagger gone. "That's right," the marshal said, taking it. Reed opened his folder, drew out a document with the county seal, and stepped toward Kincaid, who stood fists clenched and breathing like a cornered animal. "Mr. Kincaid," Agent Reed said, "based on the evidence presented, you are under arrest for embezzling wages, falsifying debt ledgers, and attempting to organize vigilante violence." Kincaid blanched. His face went long. His mouth twitched into a weak smirk, like he might speak, explain, or lunge. He only took a step back and stopped. "Do you understand the charges?" the marshal asked. "I do," Kincaid forced out. The marshal signaled to one of his men. 2 stepped in. One snapped on the cuffs. The other took Kincaid by the elbow. He didn't fight. That quiet surrender spoke louder than any shout. In the crowd, someone let out a long breath. Then another. A woman began to cry and covered her face with a kerchief. Miguel squeezed his boy's shoulder. Johnny Graves leaned on his cane and said softly, "Maybe the law finally held." The fear lifted, as if a fog had blown off. People stood closer together now, not as scattered souls, as a community. That evening, Eliza and Nantan sat by the fire. The small blaze gave off an even warmth, crackling softly and lighting their faces. Eliza kept quiet, knees to her chest, wrapped in a blanket. Nantan sat close, leaning a little on his shoulder. The wound still hurt, but his mind was clear. She looked at him. In the half-light his face was steady and calm. "I'm alive because of you," she whispered. "If not for you." He didn't let her finish. With the hint of a smile he said, "And I'm alive because of you." They fell silent. Neither looked away. In that quiet there was nothing left to say. He reached out, careful, almost afraid to break the moment. She placed her hand in his. They sat like that, hand in hand, watching the fire, then the sky. It didn't matter who you were, white, native, a former slave, or an Apache warrior. "God," Eliza murmured. "He sees us all the same, doesn't he?" Nana nodded, after a beat. "That's our law," he said. "Everyone is equal." She looked at him, truly looked. Not as a rescuer, not as a fugitive, as a man she trusted with her life. And she knew, this wasn't just gratitude anymore. It was love, quiet, steady, real. Time passed. The sun over New Hope rose the same as ever, dusty and yellow like a coin. But when it shone into the old shed by the mission, it didn't find an empty room. The shed had become a school. At plain wooden tables sat both children and grown-ups. Some held chalk, others a pen. A slate hung on the wall, primers and abacuses lined the shelves. At the front stood Eliza. She taught the lesson. She smiled, reserved and warm, showing how letters join into words. No one called her servant or a liar anymore. Here she was a teacher. Out in the yard, away from the class, Nantan showed a few teenagers how to read a fresh track in dry dust, how to string a bow, how to choose ground for a garden, where the soil felt alive. He didn't waste words, but they kept coming to him. He was part of the place now, not an outsider, but a guide. Miguel Orozco worked at the smithy, fixing tack, shaping horseshoes. And Hank, once a hired hand on trail drives, hauled flour around the county, always at a fair price. Folks knew he wouldn't cheat them. One morning a letter arrived, an envelope stamped with the bureau seal. Eliza opened it right on the porch. "Dear Miss Carter," Agent Reed wrote, "the cases of Kincaid and Doolin have been referred to the district court. Your testimony and collected materials are accepted as reliable. Thank you for your civic courage." Eliza folded the letter in her hand. She glanced up at the sky, clear and calm. For the first time in a long while, she breathed out truly free. In Mesquite Crossing, people spoke out loud now. No more whispering. And when someone told the story of a girl nearly killed for telling the truth, folks didn't turn away. They listened to the end. And that's where our story comes to a close. A story of two ordinary people, a woman they tried to break, and a warrior who refused to stay silent, standing up to lies, fear, and violence. They weren't heroes at the start. They simply chose the truth. They simply wouldn't look away. And through pain and betrayal, they found not only justice, but each other. Would you, like Nantan, step in for a stranger, knowing you might die? Would you, like Eliza, stay the course when whole town turns its back? And what does real justice look like in a small town where everybody knows your name? Let's talk it over in the comments. If this story touched your heart, please like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Thank you for staying with me to the end. Until the next story, peace and goodness to you and your loved ones.